My name is Melissa Hargrove. I'm 38 years old. And on a Thursday afternoon in late November, at a dining room table set with my late mother's good china, in front of 14 people who had known me since I was a child learning to ride a bike in that very driveway, my father looked across the turkey and the candlesticks and the folded linen napkins and said, "You will pay your brother's $80,000 debt, or you are no longer my daughter." I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't push back my chair or raise my voice or give him a single word he could use to paint me as the difficult one. I just reached down to the bag beside my chair, unzipped the inner pocket with 2 fingers and slid a sealed white envelope slowly across the tablecloth toward him, past the cranberry sauce, past the gravy boat, until it came to rest against his water glass. "You'll want to open that," I said. He picked it up. He looked at me once, the way he always had. The look that was meant to remind me of my place in the order of things. Then he slid his finger beneath the seal and unfolded the document inside. I watched his eyes move across the first paragraph. I watched the color begin leaving his face, starting at the temples and traveling down, the way water drains from a bathtub when someone pulls the plug. "What is this?" he said. "It's a notice of lease non-renewal," I said. "You have 30 days to vacate the property." That would take you to the 26th of December. What he didn't know, what no one at that table knew, not my brother, not my sister-in-law, not my aunts and uncles, not my father's oldest friends who had eaten at that table for more than 2 decades, was that the house we were sitting in had been mine for 2 years and 11 months. Every check my father had written to Clearwater Properties LLC, which he believed was a faceless investment company somewhere, had landed directly in my business account. Raymond Hargrove had been my tenant for nearly 3 years. He just didn't know it. This is that story. To understand what happened at that Thanksgiving table, you need to understand what it meant to grow up the second child in the Hargrove family, and more specifically, what it meant to be the second child who happened to be a daughter. Raymond Hargrove was 67 years old. He had worked for 32 years as a senior infrastructure project manager at a civil engineering consultancy based in Naperville, Illinois, a suburb southwest of Chicago where the houses have 2-car garages, and the lawns are kept with a kind of competitive neatness. He had retired at 63 with a solid pension, a savings account that was respectable but not excessive, and a version of himself he'd been carefully constructing for as long as I could remember, the patriarch, the provider. The man who had built something worth inheriting. The house on Birchwood Court had 4 bedrooms, a finished lower level, a wraparound porch, and a back garden with a gas fireplace my mother had considered her greatest domestic achievement. My mother, Carolyn Hargrove, had died of ovarian cancer when I was 24, and my brother was 27. She was 54 years old. She left behind a husband who responded to her loss by tightening his grip on the story of their family, and 2 children who responded to grief in entirely different ways. My brother responded by unraveling. I responded by building something. Derek Allen Hargrove was 41 years old. He was tall and broad-shouldered like my father, with the same easy, unearned confidence that made strangers want to trust him before they had any reason to. Derek had started 3 businesses in the 12 years since my mother's death. A home renovation company that closed after 14 months when a supplier dispute went unresolved. A sports bar franchise in Naperville that collapsed under a lawsuit filed by a former business partner 2 years after opening, and most recently, a commercial cleaning company called Apex Property Solutions, which had accumulated, and I know this figure precisely because I obtained the financial filings through a contact in my professional network, $83,200 in outstanding obligations to suppliers, a regional bank, and 2 private investors, one of whom had already assigned the debt to a collections attorney. Derek had a wife named Pam who was 39. Pam had 2 modes of operation: spending money and pretending not to know where it had gone. They had 2 sons, Caleb and Ryan, who were 9 and 7 years old respectively. The boys were genuinely wonderful. I want to be clear about that, because they were not the problem, and they never would be. The problem was simpler and older than any of Derek's businesses. The problem was that Derek Hargrove had never, not once in his adult life, been allowed to fully face the consequences of a decision he had made. Because Raymond Hargrove had decided, somewhere in the early years of fatherhood, that his son was the one who carried the family forward, and that carrying the family forward meant being protected from the ordinary weight of accountability. I had watched this pattern operate with the precision of a mechanism my entire life. When Derek was 20 and borrowed my father's car without asking and returned it with a cracked rear axle after a night that he declined to explain in detail, my father paid the repair bill, told our insurance company the damage had occurred in a parking lot, and grounded Derek for 10 days. When I was 17 and misjudged the distance reversing out of our neighbor's driveway on a rainy October afternoon, I was informed that my college reference letter from my father's colleague would not be written until I had personally repaid the $890 repair cost for their bumper. I had been saving from babysitting jobs for 2 years. I cleared the debt in 13 days. When Derek was 26 and asked my father for $5,000 to cover a cash flow gap in his renovation business, my father wrote the check the same afternoon without requesting a single document. When I asked my father, at 23, for $2,000 to bridge the gap while waiting for my first paycheck from a new job in Chicago, he told me that money had to be earned and suggested I look into a credit line. I did not ask again. Instead, I borrowed from a college friend, paid her back in 6 weeks, and I never told my father. When Derek's sports bar began failing and he needed my father to co-sign a secondary loan, my father signed without hesitation. He told me about it on a Sunday evening phone call in what I can only describe as a tone of pride. "Your brother needed someone in his corner," he said. I was sitting in my apartment in Lincoln Park, finishing a risk analysis for a client presentation that was happening the next morning, having eaten dinner standing at the kitchen counter because my table was covered in spreadsheets. "That's great, Dad," I said. And I said nothing more. I need to tell you about the night that set everything in motion, because Thanksgiving was the ending. The beginning was a Sunday in the second week of February, at 6:49 in the evening, when my father called and said something I had spent my entire adult life knowing was eventually coming. "Melissa," he said, "your brother is in serious trouble, real trouble this time. He owes $80,000 that he cannot pay, and if it goes much further, he'll lose the business, the car, possibly the house he's renting. Pam is talking about leaving. I cannot allow that to happen to my son." I was standing at my kitchen window on North Clark Street. Outside, the temperature had dropped to 9 degrees and the wind was off the lake, the particular kind of Chicago February wind that makes every surface feel hostile. I had spent the weekend preparing for a board presentation I was delivering on Tuesday for a client portfolio valued at $4.6 million. "I hear you, Dad," I said. "I need you to help him," he said. "You make excellent money. You've always been the responsible one. You've always managed things well. Derek needs $80,000 by the end of April. I think you can do that for him." I was quiet for a moment. "Dad," I said, "I'm not going to pay Derek's debt." The silence that followed was the specific kind of silence that exists just before something changes permanently. "I'm going to need you to think very carefully about what you just said," he replied. "Because family is what we have. And right now your brother needs his family." "I understand," I said. "And my answer is no." He hung up. He did not call me for 3 weeks. When he did call, it was not to apologize. It was to tell me that Thanksgiving was coming, that he expected me to be there, and that he expected me to arrive ready to do the right thing by my family. I wrote the date down on the notepad on my desk, Thursday, the 24th of November. Then I made a phone call of my own. I want to be precise about what I felt in the days after that February phone call, because I think there is an expectation that there should have been rage. What I actually felt was closer to the sensation of a picture finally coming into complete focus after years of squinting at it from the wrong distance. A kind of clarity that arrives not in a flash, but in a slow, undeniable settling. I had spent 14 years building a financial consulting practice from nothing. At the time of that call, my firm had 1 full-time employee and 3 part-time contractors, and we managed a combined client portfolio of just over $9 million across institutional and individual accounts. I had paid off my graduate school loans at 31. I had no consumer debt. I had a retirement account in good health and an investment account I had seeded at 25 and tended carefully since. I had worked for all of it with a discipline that had come at a real personal cost, and I had never once asked my father for a single dollar of it. And I owned the house on Birchwood Court. I had purchased it quietly almost 3 years before, through a Delaware-registered limited liability company I had formed and named Clearwater Properties, LLC. The transaction had originated from a decision my father made in the spring of that year. He had decided to sell the house. He listed it with a real estate agent at $495,000. He received 2 offers. He rejected both as insufficient. He pulled the listing. 2 months later, with his finances having tightened in retirement, he needed to either sell or convert to a rental situation. And a property management company I had quietly engaged reached out to him on behalf of a private buyer. The private buyer was me. I paid $463,000 fair market value on a closing date that fell on a Wednesday in early December. My father became a tenant of Clearwater Properties, LLC at a monthly rent of $2,150, which I had deliberately set below market rate because I wanted him to be comfortable. I wanted the house my mother had loved to remain in the family's life without financial strain. I had taken care to make the arrangement genuinely kind. I had not disclosed that I was the buyer because I understood, with the certainty that comes from 38 years of close observation, that the moment my father discovered I owned it, he would experience it as leverage. He would see an asset of mine that he was entitled to treat as a shared family resource. He would request renovations, reduce rent expectations, import his vision of what the house owed him. The kindness would curdle as soon as the power became visible. I had watched how he operated for my entire life. I knew exactly what would happen. So I had remained quiet. I had been his landlord for nearly 3 years, and he had been a perfectly adequate tenant, prompt with rent, reasonable about the property, and completely unaware of who was on the other side of the lease agreement. After the February call, I made 3 decisions. The first was that I would not pay Derek's debt. That was already settled. The second was that I would attend Thanksgiving. My father had commanded it, my aunts and uncles would be present, and I had understood since I was a young woman that the moments which genuinely shift things happen in front of witnesses. The third was that I would bring with me a formal notice of lease non-renewal for the property at Birchwood Court, specifying a vacate date of the 26th of December, prepared by my attorney and valid under Illinois law. I called my attorney, Dana Whitfield, on a Monday morning in early March. Dana had represented my business interests for 7 years and understood me well. I explained what I intended. There was a pause on her end, and then she said, "Melissa, you're certain?" "I have been certain for longer than I realized," I said. "I'm ready." She told me everything would be prepared well in advance of November. What followed was 9 months that looked entirely ordinary from the outside and were entirely deliberate from the inside. I went to work. I managed my clients' accounts. I met my friend Joanna every other Thursday for dinner at a Thai place on Halsted Street we had been visiting since we were in our late 20s. I called my father every 2 or 3 weeks and kept those calls measured and pleasant and completely unrevealing. I asked about his health. I asked about the boys. I said I was looking forward to Thanksgiving. He responded warmly in the way he always did when he was not actively extracting something from me. I also began keeping a written record. From early March onward, I maintained a dated log of every interaction with my father and every mention of Derek's financial situation. Not because I needed documentation for the eviction. Dana had that well in hand. But because I wanted to be able to look back later and know that I had acted from something solid, not from anger or wounded pride. I wanted a record I could hold. In March, my father mentioned on a Sunday call that Derek had consulted a debt restructuring specialist and was working through a plan. He said this with the satisfied tone of someone who believes a problem is already behind them. He did not mention me or the $80,000. I noted the date and a summary. In April, he called on a Sunday afternoon to report that Derek's restructuring plan had not proceeded as hoped, and that one of the private investors had sent a formal demand letter. He sighed the particular sigh he deployed when he wanted to communicate noble suffering. Then he said, "I hope you've had time to reconsider." I said, "I've been thinking about it every day, Dad." This was not a lie. He took it as encouragement. I noted the date and moved on. In May, Derek called me directly for the first time in over a year. I let it go to voicemail. The message he left was 7 minutes and 41 seconds long, which I know because I timed it before listening. He explained the debt situation with accuracy. He said he regretted not being more present as a brother over the years. He said he loved me. He said that once he was through this difficulty, he would repay me with interest, and that family was the foundation of everything that mattered. His voice was sincere in the exact way it was always sincere when he needed something. I did not call him back. In June, I drove to Naperville for a weekend visit. I had dinner with my father, Derek, Pam, and the boys on a Saturday evening. Caleb showed me a model airplane he had been building from a kit, and Ryan demonstrated a card trick he had spent 2 weeks learning from a library book. I sat on the living room floor with them for 35 minutes working through the trick until Ryan could land it consistently. The dinner itself was pleasant enough until my father, passing the roasted potatoes, said casually and in front of everyone, "Melissa has always been the financially sharp one in this family. I'm sure she's been seriously thinking about how to help Derek through this." He said it in the tone of someone confirming a known fact rather than applying pressure. Pam looked at her plate. Derek looked at his plate. I said, "I'm always thinking about how to be most useful, Dad." I smiled. I served myself more potatoes. The moment moved on. On the drive back to my hotel that evening, I passed the house on Birchwood Court with its porch light on and the glow from the back garden fireplace visible through the side window. I sat in that feeling for a moment. The feeling of holding something important that the people inside did not yet know you were holding. It was not triumphant. It was more like the feeling of knowing the ending of a book while still watching someone else turn the pages. In August, Dana sent me the finalized eviction notice for review. It was clean, precise, and legally complete. I read it 3 times and then authorized her to date and notarize it in November. She confirmed that serving the document on Thanksgiving Day would constitute valid legal service in Illinois, as the holiday did not exempt that date from civil process. I told her to proceed. In September, my father called to tell me that matters had reached a critical juncture, that Derek's civil obligation had escalated, and that he needed to know, definitively, whether I intended to help. "Melissa," he said, "I need an answer. If you're not going to step up, I need to know that now so I can figure out another way." His voice was controlled, but I could hear the compression in it, the effort of a man who was very accustomed to being the one setting the terms. I said, "Dad, let's all sit down together at Thanksgiving and sort it out properly. I'll be there. I'll have everything with me." He said, "Good. That's what I needed to hear." He assumed I had yielded. He had been listening for the sound of capitulation, and when he heard something that resembled it, he stopped listening. What I had said was that I would be there and that I would have everything with me. Both of those things were entirely true. But I had not agreed to a single dollar. In October, I booked a direct flight from O'Hare, reserved a rental car, and packed the sealed envelope from Dana in the interior pocket of my carry-on bag, where it stayed flat against my side for the entire flight from Chicago to Naperville and then for 2 days in the hotel where I stayed the night before Thanksgiving. On the Wednesday evening before Thanksgiving, I had dinner alone at a small Italian restaurant downtown. A bowl of pasta, a glass of Barolo. I thought about my mother, which I always did on the night before that holiday. She had loved Thanksgiving with a devotion that embarrassed her sometimes. She had pressed the linen tablecloths herself. She had used the china her own mother had left her. She had made a sage butter turkey that required 2 days of preparation and filled the whole house with a smell I can still locate if I close my eyes and try. After she died, my father ordered catering for 3 consecutive years. Then he stopped hosting altogether until Derek and Pam moved their family into the master suite and Pam took over the organizing. I thought about what my mother had said to me in the last year of her life. She had said, "Melissa, the women in this family disappear. Don't you disappear." I had thought about those words on average once a week for 14 years. I thought about them over my pasta on a Wednesday in November. I finished my wine. I paid my bill. I went back to the hotel and slept very well. If you have been watching this story and you recognize yourself in it, if you are the one who was always the responsible one, the one expected to absorb whatever the family needed absorbed, I want you to stop for a moment and leave a comment below. It can be 1 word or 10 sentences. Tell me if you have ever been asked to fix something you did not break. Tell me if you have ever been holding something quietly, waiting for the right moment to set it down. And if you have not subscribed to this channel yet, do it now, because the story we are bringing you next week involves a forged signature, a wedding day, and a business partner who was never what she appeared to be. You will not want to miss it. Thanksgiving dinner on the 24th of November began at 2 in the afternoon. The house on Birchwood Court smelled of turkey and rosemary and the pine-scented candles Pam had arranged on the mantelpiece in groupings of 3, the way she had seen done on a decorating program she watched. The table was set for 14. My father's older brother, Uncle Gerald, was there with his wife Patricia. 2 of my father's oldest cousins, Frank and Norm, had driven in with their wives from Evanston and Wilmette, respectively. And then there were Walt and Beverly, my father's friends of 23 years, who'd been coming to Thanksgiving at that house since before I had gone to college. They had known me since I was 12. Beverly had come to my mother's funeral and sat with me in the third pew and held my hand during the reading. I arrived at 1:47 in the afternoon carrying a bottle of wine I had selected carefully from a shop near my hotel and a pie from a bakery in town. Pam opened the door and hugged me in the way she did, briefly, near the shoulder. Derek hugged me for longer and told me I looked well. My father came from the kitchen with the dish towel folded over his forearm and shook my hand firmly, as he always did, the handshake of a man greeting a business contact rather than a child he had raised. The meal itself was, for 2 hours, an ordinary Thanksgiving. Gerald told a story about his golf game that had the table half listening and half performing attention. Ryan showed Beverly his card trick and she pretended to be astonished in a way that clearly delighted him. Frank and Norm talked about the construction on the expressway. The turkey was good. The stuffing was excellent. I ate and I drank water and I kept the wine I had brought untouched in front of me. I wanted absolute clarity in my head for what was coming. At 4:17 in the afternoon, my father tapped the rim of his water glass with the handle of a butter knife. The table quieted in the natural way tables do when the host requests attention. "Before we get to dessert," he said, settling into his chair with the ease of a man who is completely comfortable occupying the center of a room. "I want to take a moment as a family. Because family is the most important thing any of us has." He paused to let this settle. As most of you know, Derek has been navigating a difficult stretch with his business. It's been a hard year, but family shows up for family. That's what we do. He looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between gratitude and authority, as though he were thanking me for something I had already agreed to do. And Melissa has spent a great deal of time thinking about how she can be there for her brother at this moment. I thought it was appropriate to acknowledge that here at the family table, because we don't keep secrets here. 14 people turned toward me. I held my father's gaze. I let the silence exist for 4 full seconds. I know it was 4 because I counted. Then I reached down to the bag at the side of my chair. I unzipped the interior pocket with steady fingers. I removed the white envelope with Dana Whitfield's firm name and address printed neatly in the upper left corner. I slid it across the linen tablecloth toward my father, navigating between the cranberry sauce and the gravy boat until it rested against his water glass. "You'll want to open that," I said. He looked at the envelope. He looked at me. Something moved behind his eyes. Not quite alarm yet, but the anticipation of it. He broke the seal. He unfolded the document. I watched his eyes travel across the first paragraph. I watched what happened to his face as understanding arrived. Not all at once, but incrementally, the way a photograph develops in a dark room, each detail emerging more starkly than the last. "What is this?" he said. His voice had gone very quiet. "It's a notice of lease non-renewal from Clearwater Properties LLC, I said in the tone I used when explaining something straightforward to a client. "You have 30 days from today's date to vacate the property at Birchwood Court. That brings you to the 26th of December. He stared at the document. Then he looked up at me. "Clearwater Properties," he said. "Is mine," I said. "I purchased the house 2 years and 11 months ago. I formed the LLC, arranged the transaction through a property management company, and I have been your landlord since the December of that year. Every rent check you wrote to Clearwater came directly to me." The table had a quality of silence I have not experienced before or since, the kind that forms when a large group of people collectively suspend breathing. Beverly's hand went to her mouth. Uncle Gerald leaned forward very slightly in his chair. Walt, who had known my father since they were both young enough that neither of them had any gray in their hair, was looking at Raymond Hargrove with an expression I could not quite categorize. Something that was not entirely surprise. "You own this house," my father said. It was not fully a question. It was more like a statement being tested to see if it would hold its shape. "I do," I said. Derek had set his fork down. Pam was looking at the table in front of her with the focused attention of someone who wishes very much they were somewhere else. "Why would you keep something like that from me?" my father said, and in the question there were several other questions layered beneath it, and I could hear all of them. "Because you were going to sell the house," I said, "and I didn't want it to leave the family. I wanted you to be able to stay in the home you had built a life in, at a rent that was manageable for you, without the pressure of ownership costs. So I bought it. And I kept my involvement quiet because I knew, from 38 years of watching how you operate, Dad, that if you knew I owned it, it would become something you felt entitled to negotiate with. I didn't want that. I wanted it to stay clean." "And now?" he said. "And now," I said, "you have announced at your family's Thanksgiving table, in front of everyone who matters to you, that I have agreed to pay $80,000 of my brother's debt. You did not ask me. You did not confirm it with me. You presented it as decided. And so I think it is time to be clear about a few things. I did not raise my voice. I did not feel the need to. I will not be paying Derek's debt," I said. "Derek is 41 years old. He has access to restructuring services, legal counsel, and options available to any adult in this country managing financial difficulty. His debt is not something I created, and it is not something I am responsible for resolving. I say this with full respect for the difficulty of his situation and without any desire to cause him harm." Derek said very quietly, "Melissa." I turned to him. "I'm not finished," I said, gently. "And I'm not angry with you." He nodded and was quiet. "The house is mine," I continued, returning to my father. "The tenancy as structured can no longer continue, given the way this family has chosen to operate. The notice gives you 30 days, which takes you to the 26th of December. I will honor that timeline completely, and I will facilitate your transition in every practical way that falls within my legal obligations to you as a tenant, and my personal obligations to you as your daughter." I folded my hands on the tablecloth. "That's all I have," I said. My father sat with the document in his hands. His face had completed its transition. Whatever color had been there before was gone now, replaced by something grayer and harder. His hands were completely still in the way that requires real effort. Uncle Gerald cleared his throat. Beverly looked at Walt. Walt was looking at the space between his plate and his glass. Patricia, Gerald's wife, who had said almost nothing all afternoon, said quietly, "Raymond." My father said nothing. I picked up my water glass and took a long sip. Outside the window behind his chair, it had begun to snow. Early November snow in the way of the Chicago suburbs, light and uncommitted, the kind that touches the grass and dissolves before it can claim anything. I watched it for a moment. Then I looked back at the table. "Should we bring out the pie?" I said. The meal ended within 25 minutes after that, not because anyone issued an instruction to leave, but because the room had undergone a shift that no amount of conversation about football or the holiday traffic could reverse. Walt and Beverly were the first to say their goodbyes, warmly and with the slightly apologetic efficiency of people who understand that the most caring thing they can do is give a family space. Frank and Norm and their wives followed. Uncle Gerald and Patricia were the last family members to leave, and Gerald spent about 15 minutes in the living room with my father, before standing up, squeezing his brother's shoulder, and walking out to his car without looking back. I stayed until 6:15. I helped Pam load the dishwasher. I organized the leftover containers. I said goodnight to Caleb and Ryan, who were upstairs entirely insulated from the afternoon's events by the merciful indifference of childhood. I told Caleb his model airplane was going to be something spectacular. I let Ryan show me the card trick one more time. My father did not speak to me again that evening. He sat in the living room with the television on and watched it with the concentrated expression of a man who is watching nothing at all. Derek walked me out to the rental car. It was dark and cold, and the snow had stopped, leaving only the faintest suggestion of white on the grass, already disappearing. "You've been planning this for a long time," he said. His voice was quiet and had no accusation in it. "I've been prepared for a long time," I said. "There's a difference." He looked at his shoes. "I never meant for things to go this way." I know, I said. But meaning well and doing something about it are two separate acts, and the distance between them matters. He didn't answer that. I got in the car and drove back to my hotel. My father called me 3 times in the week that followed. I allowed the first two to go to voicemail. Both messages were explanations, careful, articulate reconstructions of how things had come to be the way they were, how the family circumstances had placed him in an impossible position, how he had done what he had done because he had seen no other path. The third message arrived on a Friday evening in early December. It was different in texture. His voice was quieter. He said he had been doing some thinking. He said he believed he may have been unfair to me for a long time, and that he was not entirely sure how long that had been going on, or how to begin addressing it. He paused for several seconds. Then he said, "Call me when you're ready. I'll be here." I listened to that message 3 times in a row, sitting at my kitchen table with the lights low and the city outside making its ordinary evening noise. Then I set my phone down. I want to tell you truthfully what I felt in the weeks after Thanksgiving, because I know the story that people want to hear has a certain shape. The narrator feels vindicated, powerful, cleanly released, and there were moments of that. Moments where the relief was real, but what I felt most consistently was something closer to the specific fatigue that arrives at the end of a very long effort. When you finally set down something heavy and discover that your body has been compensating for the weight so long that standing straight without it feels unfamiliar. My attorney and I met with my father in the second week of December at a coffee shop near his new apartment, a 2-bedroom in a building not far from the golf course where he spent his Tuesday mornings. The apartment was comfortable and suited him well, though I knew the transition from the house would take time. We structured an agreement that included waiving his final month of rent and providing a moving stipend, because I believe that fairness should be extended even when it has not been equally returned. My father and I have not yet had the full conversation about what Thanksgiving meant or what the years before it meant. That conversation will happen. I am not rushing it because I have spent enough of my life operating on other people's schedules. I know it will happen when it can be honest. And honest conversations are not built quickly. Derek and his family are working with a restructuring firm. He called me in January to say he had taken a consulting position part-time and was developing a structured payment plan for his obligations. He did not ask me for anything. I told him I was genuinely glad he was moving forward. I meant it with my whole heart. There is something I have been sitting with since that November afternoon, and I want to offer it to anyone watching this who has recognized themselves somewhere in this story. If you are the responsible one, the one who shows up, who delivers, who has built something real through years of work and discipline and refusal to disappear, hear this: your competence is not consent. Your steadiness is not an open invitation. Your silence is not agreement with the terms being assigned to you. You are allowed to be the one who holds something carefully and still choose when to set it down. The moments that actually change things, the ones that rearrange the architecture of how a family understands itself, are never built in anger. They are built in 9 months of ordinary mornings, in phone calls to attorneys, in lease agreements and financial records and flights booked weeks in advance. They are built in stillness, while the people who have underestimated you are still looking at the menu of your generosity and deciding what they would like to order. I did not serve that notice because I wanted to hurt my father. I served it because I needed, at 38 years old and after 14 years of building something that was genuinely mine, to be seen as what I actually was. Not the solution to someone else's problem. Not the backup plan. Not the one who could always be counted on to absorb the damage. The owner of the house. The one who had been holding everything quietly the whole time. My mother told me not to disappear. I didn't, and this is what staying looked like. If this story brought something up for you, if you recognized yourself in the woman who was expected to give more than she ever received, or in the daughter who built something real while being told it wasn't enough, I want to hear from you in the comments. Tell me your version. Tell me if you are in the middle of your own long, quiet build, even a single word. Even just, I see you, and I want to leave you with this. Is there something you have been holding quietly, something true, something real, that you know when the time finally comes, is going to change everything? What is it? What are you building in the silence? To each and every one of you who watched this story from beginning to end, thank you. Not in a small way. in a real way. You gave more than an hour of your life to Melissa's story, and that is not something we take lightly here. We started this channel because we believed that the women who hold things together in the dark, who build and endure and wait, deserve to have their stories told with the precision and dignity they have always deserved and so rarely receive. The fact that you are here, week after week, that you comment and share and come back, you are the reason the next story gets told. Every comment you leave below becomes fuel for the next woman who needs to hear that she is not alone in what she is carrying. If you have not subscribed yet, please do that right now. It takes 3 seconds and it means everything to a channel like ours. And tell us in the comments, what part of Melissa's story hit you hardest? We read every single one. We will see you very soon.